When you start a gaming session, your players should know right where their characters are, what day it is, what time of the day it is, what is the weather, right? What is the atmosphere around them? Who is around them? The players should know all that before the session starts, so they are at least prepared to react to the situation. You don't want to throw players in raw. Not at the start of a session. They're going to face a lot of that as they move forward, running into situations that they can't plan for. But you never start them there. You want them stable from the start, ready to face the chaos going forward. So I got to ask you, after you get them started, they're in a place, they talk with their characters, how comfortable are you as a game master? Like moving them from one spot to another. So they're in a town, we'll say they're at a bar, you know the deal. They talk for a bit with their characters. Well, how do you even end that scene? Do you wait for them to stop talking and get quiet? Well, you should let them go on in a scene as long as they're showing some energy. You don't want to spend too much time there. Let them play it out. If they get quiet and you have non-player characters around, you really want to maybe influence further conversation with players that are getting quiet with their characters if you think that's necessary. But at any point, how do you end it? Well, I would tell you, you can just simply step in and say, all right, is everybody really done at this scene? Have you said everything you have to say with your characters? Like, give the players indication that you're ready to move to the next spot. But what about when they're moving in the town? Do you have them just jump from wherever they're at to where they were going? Or are you willing to say, okay, you leave that bar, you're going down this street, you're on your way there. Do you take advantage of that? Do you tell them that they see random people around? Do you start painting the town a bit more, the atmosphere, the area? Or do you just skip and jump right, say, to the shop? Do you say that the characters are just in the shop already? Or do you let them know that they're walking, up to the shop and you tell them what's going on around the shop? And do you wait for your players to say what they're doing with their characters? Or do you just assume, like quite often? Right? And if you assume often, are you running into the situation where players might be saying, well, I wouldn't do that with my character? That can happen quite often when you assume too much, especially if you're running the game for a lot of different players, like you're a public game master. As a game master, I'll have them walk through the town, right? I'll give them some time there. And maybe they might even choose to interact with people that I'm telling them that are out in the street. They might want to go to a different place as they're thinking about what's going on. And it's a chance for me to really paint the place up a bit more. And maybe I can take advantage of that little walk time. Maybe that will be a time I want to introduce a non-player character that might offer information. So I can either use it, like that in a very specific way, or just use it to give some color, right? Give some time, make the place feel alive. And when they get to the shop, I'm going to have them walking up to the shop. They're not already going to be in the shop, because I find a lot of that is just rushing. Like, you're not letting things flow. And I've seen some game masters that will try to say, have the characters leave, and they're on the road, and you can see the game master just going semi into panic mode, or they're having a hard time with it, or they're all over the place trying to figure out what's going on. No. As a game master, you don't just show that you have patience and you're taking you have control and you're taking your time as you're going. You have to sort of have that control. So, a little bit of fake it till you make it. But don't worry. Don't panic. Right? You're just telling players that their characters are moving through an area, and you can just let that flow a bit. Now, you don't want a lot of dead air. You don't want to, get in scenes, tell them they're moving through somewhere, and then they're not saying anything and you go quiet. You don't want that. So you're always going to put them into a scene and then tell them information, like what they're seeing. Like people. You want to, again, you can say the weather, what time of day it is. you're going to feed the senses, you're going to feed information, and through that you will get a reaction from the players with their characters. And when you start up that reaction, it's a chain, right? It's probably going to lead to dialogue between characters and other things that they're going to ask you questions. Maybe they'll decide to do something they never thought of before. You really don't want to do this as a game master. If you're rushing things like jumping the characters from one spot to another, you don't want to jump them right into a combat where they could have either avoided it, surprised the enemy. Like on further examination, if they had more control over what they were doing with their characters leading up to the, that fight, that encounter, they would have had all these other options. But here you are saying, well, you're up here and these guys see you, and here you're going into a combat roll initiative. I've seen plenty of game masters do that. Many of them still do it in 2023, sadly. Don't do that ever, right? Let players, have all the options they can. Let them try to avoid something if they want to, right? Let them do all of that, right? Be patient as a game master and never see it as you have to achieve a certain thing more than what you're doing. You put the encounters in there. You put the stuff into the game. Now let fate, go. Let the process go and don't try to force something. You've done your work. Some sessions, some of that work might be avoided. It might even seem boring to you. Well, guess what? Here's the good news. It's not just on you. The players also have to be interacting, role-playing, being interesting in their own right. And that package between your effort and their effort should make sure any session, even one where they're avoiding some things, is still interesting, entertaining, fun, and what have you. You might be someone who's not really sure, where you stand when it comes to character death. Well, I'm an old school game master. Character death has an effect on players, a psychological effect. In the old school, there was no worry about balance when it came to encounters. So players knew their characters could run into monsters that they were not meant to fight. And death, to the character could come really quickly and often. It would make players take the game way more serious. It would make them be more careful, plan things out, think before they run into something carelessly. And you can see in games where character death isn't that much of a threat, players will ignorantly have their characters rush into something they probably wouldn't do otherwise. And to me, it degrades the game just a bit because you want players to take these areas, serious. The whole point of an encounter or combat is a challenge to the player characters, and you want players to see them as challenges. So they are more cautious when they run into them. So they play the game a little better, right, each time. They're learning from it, right? So they can go in and learn the hard way. Their character falls on their face. They lose a character. They have to come back and realize that is not the way to play the game. Here's the good news about this whole experiment. At the end of it, you find out old school is not as hard as you would think it is, and character death does not have to be often at all. It doesn't have to happen often at all. With a good old school dungeon master, with a player that isn't going to play foolishly, you get a much better, more intense game. Players taking things way more serious, but they are surviving. Any good experienced old school player will tell you it's not a meat grind. When you play the game in a certain way, when you're taking your time, being patient, character death is still a threat. But it's not the meat grind that a lot of people say old school is. Old school is only a meat grind if you keep having people trying not to learn from their experience and running at things foolishly. The game will make you pay the price for playing these games poorly. First person dialogue in a tabletop role-playing game. What do I mean? Like you're just directly talking as your character, or the game master is directly talking as the non-player character, and you're in character, getting to know people, right? Why is that all important? Well, first off, it's good for character development, but it's also good to bring places like the town alive, like the place alive. The more you're interacting with people, the more you're running into people, the more you're getting to know things. The more through improvising, dialogue that the game master might think to, offer information, have a non-player character tell you something. Or through that dialogue, you're going through character development as a player. And as you're answering questions, it's telling you a lot about the character. Think of it like being a cook, right? Or you're learning to be a chef, or you're learning to be a cook, or whatever, and you're doing that dish and you're learning certain techniques. Well, what you find out is these techniques are going to work in a lot of other dishes. So as you learn one dish, you most likely have learned a variety of other dishes without realizing it, or at least the technique for doing all these other dishes. When you're answering questions, when you're in dialogue, really finding out what your character thinks through, going through that process, it's going to tell you, they don't just think this thing. It most likely means they think this, this, and this, and this. So through a little bit of dialogue, you can quickly start developing your character in the game. So that first-person dialogue becomes important. And you should always consider trying to dive into it rather than trying to avoid a lot of it and then running to the dungeon or running to an encounter or whatever. No. Let the place come alive and let all these other things happen, like character development and whatnot. And players that avoid or want to avoid dialogue like that, I would suggest that you don't do it. And here's another good thing. You don't need to do special voices. The imagination of the other players and the game master will take care of everything for you. You just have to speak as yourself. Just maybe watch your tone. If your character's happy, well, your character shouldn't sound sad. You shouldn't sound sad as you speak, right? So make sure you're just saying words your character would say, and you can use your regular voice. You don't have to do nothing else. And the imagination of everyone else at the table will take care, they'll fill in the gaps. No worries. Have patience when players ask you silly questions. Like they're asking you a question that if you give them the answer, like, well, where would the answer come from? Right? How would they know that information, right? Would a voice, come from the sky and tell them this information? What's on the other side of the door? Well, what? Do they actually expect the game master to tell them what's on the other side of the door if they have not gathered this information through any other source, right? You're not going to tell them because they don't know. And if you do, well, then again, where is the information coming from? So game master, make sure you're not stumbling answering questions like that where players' character should not know the information that the player's asking for. And when a player does ask questions like that, don't get mad or upset at them. Just say, okay, they see this big head come out of the sky and it says, I can't tell you what you don't know. Or something silly, right? A little bit of humor. A tiny bit of humiliation maybe for asking the silly question. It's not too harsh. It's not bad humiliation. Even they'll probably smile and have a laugh at it, and the other players will. And it makes the point, pretty powerful for you. That's a silly question. Don't ask that question. And you do it in the process of having a little bit of fun. Oh, a head comes out of the sky and you do this. And now you don't need to lecture or say something or drill on that point. Everyone has learned something from it. That player and anyone who is thinking of asking a question like that, that they should not be asking. Well, the point is going to be made to them through that process. You're simply not going to be answering questions like that. If you want to know what's on the other side of the door, have your character open the fucking door. High-level gaming in D&D. Well, first off, if you're playing WotC D&D, I know there's some breaking of math once you go so far up. Maybe you can learn something about that, and where you see the math breaking down, you make changes to the game. So from the get-go, leading up to that point, you try to leave all that out. Do your best job. With old school, it's not as hard as people make it out to be, but at the same time, what they complain about is something that I think they're confused about. It's meant to be really hard and, impossible and all these other things when you get to high level. It's likely that the characters will get wiped out in a total party kill, or they'll wipe out an enemy because it's hard to balance, but you're not meant to balance. All these negatives are natural. They actually should be happening. It's not the game breaking, right? It should be all over the place. It should be chaotic. It should be really hard to get to level 20 through that process, and most shouldn't, right? Most should not reach that level. It is meant to be outrageous. So the game is not broken. So just run it and don't worry about it. I'm serious, and I'm really serious about this. Run it. Try your best to do whatever. And if there's a total party kill, oh, okay. So what they're telling you is hard about high-level gaming isn't really hard. There's a few techniques, and I have videos talking about these techniques from a way to approach combat in a practical way at higher levels, and considering giving out experience for non-combat situations. So there's other ways to earn experience when you're getting up to those higher levels. But outside of that, like, the negatives are realistic. They're not game breaking, they're realistic. And if you know anything about old school likes to be realistic, right? A little bit of realism into the game, and so the game should be breaking down at higher levels. It should be, right? So as a old school DM, just run it into the high levels and let the chaos happen. That's it, and you've done your job, and you're a fine dungeon master, and the game isn't broken in the way you think. It's chaotic and meant to be all over the place with a little bit of silly math. Right? If everything is just perfect all the way through, well, then you're just back to what? Balanced, perfect combat and all that. That's not what these games are about. They're gamey to a degree, but they're unique compared to video games. There's a sense of realism and all these other things brought in. So that chaos, that breakdown of the math, in my opinion, it's meant to be that way. And if you somehow fix that, I think you're actually breaking it. So there are some tips for game masters, players, the whole nine. Anyway, for now, take care. You know what you can do? You can hit the like button. You can share the video. Oh, and there's another button you can press. That one that lets you subscribe to my channel for more content. Oh yeah, there's that bell thing. You can press that so you know when I've uploaded a new video right away.